Meet Priya, a dedicated palliative care physician. For years, Priya has been the healer by her patients' bedsides. But tonight, 7 p.m. on a Thursday, she's in a hospital bed, staring up at the ceiling, wondering how things spiraled out of control. The day began at 7 a.m. Priya's alarm blared, jolting her into action. Her household is a battleground each morning. Her 16-year-old locks herself up in the bathroom. Her 14-year-old bangs on the door, screaming, "Hurry up!" Priya, managing mediation and breakfast preparation, finally gets him to school on time. Priya's workday starts at a hospice center, about an hour's drive from home. When she walks in, she notices 3 nurses whispering behind the front desk, abruptly stopping when they see her. With a forced smile, she greets them. "Good morning." Their awkward response lingers in her mind, sowing seeds of doubt. She dives into her duties, but the unease grows. Her heart races. She's distracted, thinking, what were they saying about me? Did I make a mistake with one of my patients? Did I mess up? Priya can't afford mistakes. Her patients rely on her. And being a single mother, she needs the job security. So despite feeling off, she pushes through, working relentlessly, and by 6 p.m., she hasn't eaten all day. With a granola bar in hand, she heads to the ER for a 12-hour shift. On the drive, she juggles patient calls and voicemails. When she walks in, dizziness and chest tightness hit her. She sits down, struggling to breathe. A nurse rushes over, calling for help. Priya, the caregiver, is now the patient. Lying in the hospital bed, Priya reflects on months of overwork and mounting stress that led to this breaking point. Her high-demand job and anxiety have taken a physical toll. Today, Dr. Jonathan Fisher and I will discuss how Priya can balance her demanding career. Dr. Jonathan Fisher is a best-selling author of Just One Heart, a cardiologist, mindfulness teacher, and founder of Mind Heart Now, LLC. He's renowned for his work in mindfulness, stress mastery, and heart-centered leadership, delivering keynotes and workshops for organizations globally, including IBM and Bank of America. And I'm eager to learn what Dr. Fisher would advise for Priya, helping her to learn how to better care for herself while still caring for others. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Jonathan, before we get into your story and Priya's story, I want to share a story with you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, I became interested in getting on LinkedIn, engaging, meeting people. And I said to myself, well, I want to find like-minded people who are passionate about the things that I'm passionate about and who I can learn from. And so I start searching mindfulness, resilience, compassion, and I come upon your content and it resonates with me. And I say to myself, I got to connect with this guy. I got to meet this guy. And you were so gracious when I reached out to you. You were like, let's hop on a call. We hop on a call. Turns out we grew up 30 minutes from each other in New Jersey. We then get to meet each other in person last year. And so I'm grateful to have you as a guest on the show, but more importantly, I'm grateful to have you as a friend.
Well, that hits me in all the right spots. And it was the same story on my end. I didn't know what I was doing on LinkedIn, just kind of meeting people and what is a hashtag and what is mindfulness. And then this guy is like brother from another mother in New Jersey, Jay Abbasi, what? So, and here we are. It's been quite a ride. And just our conversations through the years have been things that I've looked forward to and I've allowed to change me. And that's the important part when I'm with you, Jay. And I know other people feel the same way.
I appreciate you saying that. And anytime we carve out time, we normally don't have enough time, and it normally goes well beyond our scheduled time when we're chatting, but we'll do our best to keep things concise here. And what we're going to be talking about today, just kind of a disclaimer for everyone, which is, while of course the story that we're talking about has to do with someone in the medical field, a doctor, and you, of course, have that background as well as a cardiologist. One doesn't have to be a doctor to really pull takeaways from what we're going to be discussing here, because all of us have high demand in our work at times. And many of us go out of our way to help everyone, which could lead to burnout. So don't feel like you have to be a doctor. I've worked with many doctors in the past, but we're really talking to anyone here who has these challenges. And you really share your story in your book. And I have it right here, Just One Heart. So I have it right here. And in your book, you also are quite vulnerable in sharing your personal story, which I think is courageous that you did. And I know some of it from our conversations,
Mm,
Jonathan. And
mm,
and in it, you discuss how your upbringing up to an experience you had where you lost a loved one and how that affected you. And it led to a breaking point where you really felt stuck.
yeah.
And in the story with Priya, for her, it was when she was lying in that hospital bed, looking up at that ceiling, wondering how things spiraled out of control. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about, I guess, that point for you, that breaking point, and what led to you getting there.
My breaking point, if you were watching, it was on a 106 in Riverside, New York City, and there was hardwood floors, and my wife was standing over me, and I was curled up on the floor. I think I was wearing my scrubs from the hospital, and I was crying and shaking hysterically, not any resemblance to my former self from just a few hours before, where I was this doctor walking through Mount Sinai Hospital, had everything put together, very professional. You wouldn't have had an idea that just beneath the surface, I wasn't only cracking, I was broken, or really felt broken. And that was really around the time that my sister Andrea was dying of an inoperable brain tumor. And Andrea, as I wrote about, was my best friend. And she was my spiritual guide, my mentor, the sort of an awe bringer in my life. Like, hey, Johnny, look at that. Listen to that bird. At the age of 40, gradually declined and eventually passed away. And here I am, losing my grounding, my support. The one person who encouraged me to get help for my mental illness troubles, she was my rock. And I'm newly married. I've got this wonderful wife, Julie, and she's looking over me thinking, this is not a way to live. And I knew that I needed help even beyond what I was getting.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about that she would say to you, which was to be
Mm,
kind to yourself, Jonathan, to be kind to
yeah.
yourself. And
Yeah.
so from that, I can relate to it because I lost my father, and you and I have talked about that, and it was very unexpected. And you even mentioned grief in your book about how that's a very difficult thing to work through and the effect that
Yeah.
it has on our overall health. So that breaking point then led to you exploring,
Mhm.
cardiologist to mindfulness meditation teacher. And so
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that journey, like how you
Mm.
explored these different topics and, how it propelled you into where you are now.
It's funny because the two things you just brought up, grief and the personal transition and this becoming something that I wasn't before, are tied together. And as I was trying to figure out how to work with grief, and a couple of books on the shelf back there are about what do you do when you lose your loved one, when you lose your best friend. I had no idea. And one of the lessons that I took away was something about what lessons can you learn and how can you honor the legacy of the person who you've lost. So it's not about you anymore and your grief. It's about how can you bring this person with you and share that person's teachings with other people. And there was something in that I knew I didn't have Andrea for very long. And I wanted to think, what parts of her did I want to show up in my life? And how did I want to help other people with that? And that was her core message of be kind to yourself, which she helped me with. And that is just sort of pumped or spilling out of the pages of the book and of all of my teaching. And when I'm with people, heart patients. So that helped me a lot. But how did I end up becoming a mindfulness meditation teacher? Well, us doctors are pretty egotistical. We always have to have a degree after our name, right? MD or the PhD. And so I'm like, well, it's not enough to just practice meditation, which I had done for 10 years, 10,000 hours of just sitting in a corner by myself, like listening to my breath. Eventually, I said, okay, it seems like this is helping me not just personally feel better, but it's making me a better doctor because I got these reviews at work from the office manager. And years ago, she said something that just surprised me. And she's like, "We all know you're a very well-trained, good doctor. You're not fun to work with." And I was like, wait a second, I'm a nice guy. What do you mean? So who I thought I was portraying and who I thought I was showing up as was not at all. There was a wide gap, Jay. And
Mm,
I realized that I wanted to not only solidify my own knowledge of what is mindfulness, what is meditation, what is this practice of non-duality and non-dual spiritual awareness, but how can I maybe bring that into my own clinic? And eventually, I led stress reduction programs for our 35 staff members and the doctors, and then for maybe 100 people and the managers. And now 38,000 people are on the healthcare team that I work with. And I've been asked to work at the executive level, helping design. Literally, I run a 6-month mindfulness training program for 38,000 employees and a 6-month positive psychology program. And this is just stuff that helped me. And so
yeah.
I went to Oxford in the UK and I spent a week and I learned how to teach this stuff. And that was about 6 or 7 years ago.
Wow. That's incredible. And hearing that before and after, it makes me think of how if we were to go back in time and tell that Jonathan who was lying on that floor that this is going to be where he was years later, he probably wouldn't believe you. And so, what an incredible journey that you've been on. And then
Mm,
you mentioned something that piqued my curiosity. You said meditation helped me in many ways. You mentioned how it helped you at the hospital and how
mm,
people were receiving you. How did it help you through some of the aspects of anxiety and burnout? If you were to point to, here's what it did for me,
mm.
what would you say it was?
It helped me of repetitive thought that I was stuck in, where I really saw myself as, number one, a victim of this large, nameless, quote, healthcare system that had it out to get me and it was going to make all doctors and nurses suffer. And it was the bad system, the kind of thing that like doctors and nurses often stand around the water cooler complaining about. Oh, they're doing this to us and me. And what mindfulness did by forcing me to sit still and just listen to my own thoughts for 5 minutes and then 10 minutes and then an hour and then a week in silence at a monastery, as I got into longer and longer periods of silence, which was totally the opposite of running around studying to get into school and all this stuff. It's like very counterintuitive. As I did that, I discovered there was this whole inner world in my own mind. And I used to think it was like a great thing. I'm so imaginative. But what I started to see was that it was like running in circles. And I kept playing the same thought loops over and over. I'm stuck. I'm stuck. It's so hard. I don't like this. I'm nervous about this, that, the other thing. And without having to fix anything, simply by witnessing these thoughts and questioning them, I started to feel more at ease because I realized that they were just thoughts.
Yeah, well said. Reminds me of that study that suggested that 80% of our thoughts are negative. So that's 4 out of every 5. And 95% of our thoughts are repetitive. So that means
Yes.
we're repeating the same negative thoughts over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I find how it's helped me
Mm,
is, as you just said there at the end, I realize they're just thoughts, which suggests that we have some detachment from the thought.
mm,
Because the problem is not how I often describe it as the problem is not the thought. The problem is that we believe the thought to be a true representation of reality. And then that thought grips us and either pulls us towards acting in a certain way or
mhm.
grips us in fear. And so with Priya's story, I want to jump into Priya's story a little bit with you, Jonathan,
Can
because
I say one thing about that?
yes,
As you were describing that, I'm thinking, why does it feel so true what you just said, where the thoughts keep us stuck? And I think it's also certain types of people, Jay. Like, not everyone is celebrating or always thinking or having these philosophical types of conversations or analyzing. I know plenty of people who are not stuck in thought. So there's something about people who are high achievers, who are maybe planners, where you think that your greatest strength is your ability to think. And I think these, myself included, these kinds of people are the ones who tend to get stuck the most, believing that I am exactly these thoughts. And I'm so proud of them. And it's almost humbling to have to separate or to try to separate myself and say, so what if it came from my own mind? That doesn't mean that it's real or even particularly valuable. And it's just very liberating, like you said. I wanted to add that on as we were moving forward.
I love it. I love it. And here's another one that really gets me is, okay, where did that thought come from? And wherever it came from, it wasn't like there was a little me in there generating the thought with like pulling the levers. So therefore, how could I take credit for the great thoughts? And then how can I get angry at the negative ones? So it works both ways. And you use the word humbling there. I totally agree. It is humbling in the best way. It takes us out of that. It's kind of like you're just riding the waves and wherever they're going to take you, up a high or down to a crashing low. And so one thing that I'm curious to learn more about you, given your background as well, what you wrote in the book is about the connection between mind body, or as you refer to it, mind heart. And so in Priya's story, she really gets gripped by anxiety. And anxiety is, I think, a lot of what people are really struggling with. So can you talk a little bit about that connection? What is the connection between anxiety and health, or even more specifically, cardiovascular health?
I put anxiety into the spectrum of dozens of human emotions, which are fascinating, and they never get old, they never get boring. So anxiety is a cluster, and just like many emotions or states, human states, it's not just a thought. It's not, oh, I'm worried about something going wrong. It's also not just a feeling. Oh, I feel my heart pounding. It's this interesting combination or amalgamation of thoughts and feelings and then behaviors which result from them. And it's kind of like, and they reinforce each other. In terms of anxiety, my view now on anxiety is that it's an incredibly useful, potentially useful state. Now, I didn't used to think that. I used to think it was something to be ashamed of. I was like, oh, I'm so worried all the time. Well, now that I've gotten it under some control, I see that it can be a strength, because that means I'm really dialed in to what may happen in the future, which can be a good thing. I can plan, I can be creative, I can see the problem before it happens. And so I don't want to make anxiety like the bad guy that, oh, I have it, so it's such a horrible thing, because in a way, that self-judgment makes it worse. So I wanted to begin by saying, can we just accept, like, anxiety isn't this evil thing. We evolved, some of us, to have more of it than others. I happen to have it as my superpower. They have these 5 personality traits, like OCEAN, and N is neuroticism. And I'm like all the way over here on being neurotic, which is like worrying about things all the time, which is part of my anxiety. So now that that's under better control, I can say that when we have anxiety, there's an alarm bell in the brain. And you've taught about this so beautifully, the amygdala and the limbic system. It's the way that our thoughts and feelings connect. Thoughts in the mind stimulate certain brain centers, which then release both chemical signals and electrical signals. And there are literally little electrical chemical pathways that connect parts of the mind with parts of the heart. There are nerves that go in both directions. One of them is the vagus nerve, which tells the mind how the heart is doing. And the other is the sympathetic nervous system, which tells the heart how the mind is doing. And the purpose of these states is for thoughts to turn into feelings. So we feel things in our body, which then drive certain behaviors, which are meant to keep us safe. The problem with anxiety, I find, is that while it may, in its initial spark, alert us to a potential threat, so many of us overcook that. And we bake it too long. And we grind those gears over and over and over. And then what happens in the heart, Jay, and this is where people come into my clinic, and this is where it gets real. I have people who come to see me, they don't have a heart problem, but I can see that their blood pressure is high, their heart's racing all the time, they're sweating, they think they're having a heart attack. What they have is unaddressed anxiety. So a challenge in the mind that's not addressed wisely or skillfully for years until someone comes to see me or a therapist or someone else can end up revving up their body's cardiovascular system and eventually lead to a heart attack or a stroke. And that's something that is totally preventable with the work that you're doing and so many people are doing.
Jonathan, that's a very insightful perspective on how we can shift the meaning of our emotions. That's what I'm hearing. Because the meaning that we're giving to it is the problem oftentimes. And so you said that with anxiety, it could be useful, it could be a strength. And I completely agree with this. It's all about the meaning that we're giving it, how we're interpreting it, and how you respond to the experience. So, can you tell me either what you do or what you advise others to do on how to skillfully challenge the anxiety to either reinterpret or adjust the meaning so it becomes a strength rather than something that fuels more and more anxiety?
I like to make things really simple. I remember studying for my medical school exams, and you have like 1,000 drugs to remember. And I would always try to break it down into these simple categories. So the way I think about it is, let's say I'm feeling anxious right now. I have to separate. First separation is this something that's happening inside of me, or is it something that's happening in the world right now? So there could be a patient that's in front of me. I'm about to do a procedure where I'm going to stop and restart their heart, let's say. That's with the paddles, like on TV. And in my mind, I'm thinking of all the things that could go wrong. What if the electricity doesn't work on the machine? What if the power goes out? What if their heart doesn't start up again? What if we have to put an emergency pacemaker? What if their loved one outside, I have to go out and tell them that this rare complication, someone had a stroke from a procedure? All of these what ifs start. And this doesn't have to be as a doctor. It could be anything you're doing. What if I make a bad investment? So the two pieces are, number one, is this happening in the outside world? Is something actually happening? Or is it something that's happening inside of me, like thoughts or worries or fears? That's a very big distinction. The first thing is to say, okay, these worries about the future, they have not happened yet. And just label them. Okay, these are internal. These are worries. Oh, these are worries in the mind. These are types of thoughts. Oh, that's all they are. These are thoughts in my mind. So now it becomes more workable. It's no longer a reality, which is many people like myself with anxiety. Initially, we can't separate whether something's actually going to happen or not because our body feels as if it is. So step one is this really happening? And then, or is it something that's inside of me? Step two, once I've realized it's always the same answer, it's always inside of me, right? Let's put the external aside because there are things and steps we do want to take to create boundaries and barriers and to actually change our external environment. We don't want to forget about that. But going back to the inside, I can control that right now.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to work on two things. I've got to work on what's happening up here, but I also have to work on what's going on here every time I have an anxiety state.
Yeah.
And that means, and the first of those two, actually, you'd think, oh, work with your thoughts first. Just deal with for me, that's not the best way. The best is to work with the body, work with the feelings. And to notice, oh, I'm having anxiety. I'm experiencing it as a forceful heartbeat. My heart's beating really strong, and it actually hurts a little bit right now. But I know I'm not having a heart attack. I've been checked out. I'm okay. How can I settle my body? And then how can I settle my mind? And settling the body, it could be sitting still, or it could be walking or going for a run. It depends on the person. It often is taking some nice deep breaths, which activate that vagus nerve I referenced. That's the heart's way of telling the mind everything is okay. So when we take deep breaths and we blow it out, we're actually sending signals from the diaphragm back to the brain, then back to the heart, then back to the brain that settle the body down. And so that piece one is the body, and then piece two, I'm giving the short version here. We could flesh it out, the short version. And then once we've settled the body, then we can work with the thoughts. Okay, what were you thinking in the moment that made your anxiety come on so strong? What was it? And then getting into the practice of questioning the thoughts and maybe even what's called reframing the thoughts in the field of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Jonathan, I'm 100% on board with how you described the way to respond, the body first. And I do think that is oftentimes what's overlooked. I do think people want to go right into the thoughts and intellectually work through whatever the challenge is. But the reality is we are fueled most of the time by our emotions. Our emotions are what drive our behavior. Our emotions are what affect us the most. So we need to go into the body first. And what you said there, it doesn't surprise me that we have a very similar approach. I often refer to this as a motto of, it's in me, it's not me. It's in me, it's not me. Meaning, it's in me. Whatever it is, it's in me. The challenge, the disruption. And if I can observe it with detachment, just like I can reserve this pencil that I'm holding. Therefore,
Mm,
I cannot be that which I observe. So it immediately creates that separation, and I can now effectively work through whatever the disruptive emotion is.
mm,
And so in Priya's story, she went through a few different instances. First, she had some personal challenges at home and dealing with her as
for
a single
daughters.
mom with her daughters. And then
Hmm.
she went to work, had this busy schedule. She heard some whispers. It created some anxiety within her. And then it led to her having some physical ailment. If Priya were listening right now, how would you describe what happened to her? How would you describe, if you were
Mm,
to go to your experience and what you understand of her story and your own personal studies on why we
yeah.
could fall into this kind of pattern? What happened to Priya?
So if she were here, I wouldn't begin by describing it to her. I would begin by asking her questions, and I would have her come to an awareness for herself what happened. And you've already done that, which is why we know all the details of the story. So putting that aside, because I find that if I come at a patient, let's say, and I say, well, here's what's wrong with you, no one wants to hear that. But
Right.
let's say we've gone through the process of helping someone become more self aware, which is really all you have to do, I find. And so let's say we've gotten to where Priya can describe with a detached perspective, oh, there were changes in my body, there were activations in my mind. What was happening was, as I see it, she was collecting over the course of days, weeks, months, or maybe even her lifetime. She was collecting micro experiences of internal stress reactivity, one after another, after another, after another, without ever challenging each of these moments. So rather than letting things slide without making too much meaning, rather than saying no to some responsibilities at work, rather than setting boundaries for her daughters at home, she allowed, and I don't mean that in a mean way, I'm not blaming her, but I'm saying, you know, at some point, I would want her to realize that we allow things to happen to us by the choices we make.
Mm,
So I would want to empower. So after collecting all of these micro experiences of this internal stress response, which she never processed, I don't see any activity where she either goes for a walk or meditates or listens to music or calls a friend or talks to a therapist. All of these things can help us process. So eventually she reached a tipping point.
mm,
She reached a tipping point in her mind where if we asked her, we might say, well, in that moment when you ended up on the hospital gurney, what were you thinking? And
mm,
she might have had thoughts like, I can't take this anymore. I've reached my wit's end. This is it. I can't do it. So these kinds of thoughts are the thoughts that someone has who's totally burned out.
mm,
They've gone over that last step because of these collection of micro stressors. And in her body, what happened? Thoughts and feelings and the heart are deeply interconnected. There's no way to separate them. We may think you can, but every thought you have in your mind has an imprint on the heart. And we
mm,
can go into that, but we talked a little bit before that the purpose of thoughts is to interact with feelings and emotions, to generate moods and behaviors essentially, which are supposed to change or cause some kind of a behavior, let's say. And often thoughts and emotions prepare our heart for activity. So with Priya, her fear, her overwhelm, her stress, those were preparing her heart for some catastrophic emergency as if she had to run away from a bear. But there was no bear. So
mm.
instead, she ends up with pounding heartbeat, sweating, high blood pressure, and total exhaustion because her body was working so hard. And most likely, a reduced immune system as well, because her immune system had been revved up with cortisol for years. So I see what happened to her as the culmination of years of unprocessed stress and an unhealthy or unskillful way of relating to daily life.
Yeah. And daily threats as how her body was receiving them. So, what creates these kind of experiences for us is a simple message that comes from within that says, I am not safe. I am not safe. And when we don't do, as you said, challenge it, consider how we can work through that within the body, the mind, and be able to reframe, the accumulation occurs. And I agree in self awareness being the ultimate solution. It always comes back to self awareness, being able to have the kind of ownership to be able to work through this and manage this on one's own. At times, of course, people do need some help. They need some guidance to get them there because we are so immersed in our own minds. And that's where people such as yourself come in to help guide us through. And you have something that I thought was fascinating in your book. You termed it the 7 timeless traits of the heart. And I actually am going to look at my notes because you wrote something in there that I thought was really valuable to segue into this. You said it's how we can face life's difficulties with poise and skill.
Hmm.
So, with Priya's experience, how can you relate any of those, or could you please relate some of those traits into the story of what you heard in Priya? Like, what could she cultivate within herself to be able to have healthier balance?
The 7 traits emerged after speaking to 50 experts in mind-body medicine and also asking the question of each of them, when you think about the wisdom of the heart through time, what qualities emerge? And then I read many religious texts and philosophical texts, and I asked the same question. The ancient Chinese, when they were trying to answer the question of how should we live, what part of the body should we listen to? They didn't say, well, listen to the brain or the elbow or the kidney. It was listen to the heart. And the heart, by the way, is totally connected with the brain and the spirit, which I found was a common theme in a lot of these traditions. So the 7 traits, just to name them, and then I'll talk about Priya, they kind of go in an order, which work for me. The first trait of a healthy heart is steadiness. So if I'm called to the emergency room and somebody's heart is beating 200 beats a minute, I'm not going to talk to them about setting boundaries in their life. I'm going to immediately work on steadying the heart before we can do all the other good stuff. And there's different ways to do that. We just talked about some of them. So after steadiness, it's about checking in with what I think for Priya may be the most important, which is wisdom. And you talked about awareness. So wisdom means challenging the idea, especially those of us who are kind of nerdy and go-getters. We all think that wisdom lives in the brain. In my reading and in my experience, there is actually a wisdom in the heart itself, which means can we tune into the signals, the emotions, the feelings that are coming from our heart and from our body? Then can we interpret them correctly? This is where we often get it wrong. If I feel my heart pounding, I may think, oh, I'm anxious. Something must be terrible going on. Well, no, hold on a second. Maybe it's just that something important is happening right now. So I can feel that in my heart before I get into Priya's situation where it's too late. I've gone over the cliff. So wisdom is about, for Priya, it would be asking herself, well, what's important in my life? What do I want my life to look like? Asking questions is what wisdom is about. What does it mean to live a full life? What is a good life? What does it mean to be happy? What makes me happy? Do I care about happiness? So this is like, wisdom is kind of like setting up a game plan for living well that serves ourselves and also serves others. So I would focus on wisdom with Priya. And then after we worked on wisdom, the next thing is really openness of heart. So I love people like you, Jay, because you are open-hearted, which to me doesn't just mean that you are expressive and you're showing your love to other people. It goes in both directions with you and with open-hearted people. It means you also receive love from others. You don't say, oh, no, I'm not an emotional person. I don't want to go there. So it's a recognition that if a heart's valve closes and it doesn't open, if your heart valve doesn't open, within a minute, you'll die because your heart will give out under the pressure. So the heart valves need to open and close 100,000 times a day. But in our lives, we forget about that piece of openness. We say, oh, I already know what I know. I'm going to just kind of go through my day the same as yesterday. Like you said, repeating 95% of your thoughts. So I really think it's important for Priya to start thinking about, well, am I open in my life to new ideas, to new possibilities, to the fact that things could get better? And then after openness, what some people find is the greatest quality, and Brene Brown would agree with this, is wholeheartedness. Can you live with your whole heart? Can you be fully present in this moment with mindfulness? Can you let go of parts of your past that are bringing you down and tying you up so that you're not just living with half of a heart and half of your passion? Can you experience flow in your life? Can we get Priya to find things that she really loves and enjoys instead of half-heartedly kind of going through the steps? And then after wholeheartedness, this is something else that Priya needs, which is the ultimate heart quality. And the word itself means heart in Latin. The word is courage. Priya needs courage to make hard decisions, to say no, to set boundaries, to say what she will and won't accept from her other people and from her job. Even though she's a single mother, she still has choices. And then after courage, you and I know it's no fun to be serious all the time. I like lighthearted people. And the worst insult, Jay, I ever got was when someone said, Johnny, you're not lighthearted anymore. And I was like, oh, it killed me. And so I thought to myself, how did I get so down? And yes, I suffered from depression for a long time. I don't right now. How did I get so down? And how did I get through it? Well, there's this whole science called positive psychology. And I would teach Priya. I would share with her that there are 10 positive emotions, that you can become a collector of positive experiences in your day instead of an avoider of negative ones. It's a radically different way. So if I were working with her, I'd say, well, let's pick 3. Do you want to feel more joy, awe, optimism, gratitude, triumph, curiosity? We'll pick a couple of them and let's start looking for the good. So that would be the lightness of heart. And then the last one would happen, I think, without any effort with Priya, because I have a sense that she already has this quality. And this is true for many of the caregivers I know and people that work in the healing business and the helping business that I know. They don't need to be taught to have a warm heart. They already have a warm heart. The problem is that their warm heart has cooled or gotten cold because of years of building up walls of defense because of these perceived threats that you described. And so the final step of the 7 is to rekindle that flame of the heart by gradually opening it and tapping into its wisdom and finding its courage and lifting it up and letting go. And then eventually all there is left is empathy, compassion, and love. And I would love to see Priya experience that.
Yeah. It's hard for me to imagine a Jonathan that isn't lighthearted. I have to be honest with you. It's hard for me to even think about because I've known you for years. And that's what I think of when I think of you. It's lighthearted, it's smiles, it's positive energy. But I know that you had to do the work to get there.
I appreciate that. And I really want to hammer that point, Jay, and say that some of us are really, really good at faking it. I'm serious. I'm going to get real honest here. We've practiced, right? Those of us who've worked in any professional role, wherever you are, and you've been successful to some measure, the way that many of us have been able to do that without necessarily knowing how to deal with life's hardships is to put on a happy face.
Yeah.
And for me, and I'm getting a little sad because I wore this mask of happiness and lightness. And yeah, I could fool some people. And I'm not saying I was fooling you. I think you met me kind of after more than a dozen years of work on all of these things.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time wearing that mask, and there was a huge gap between what I was showing other people and what I was feeling in here.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Jonathan. And I know that a lot of people, when they go through these things, when they put on those kind of masks day in and day out, it's creating a lot of that disruption and adding to it. And I think that your steps here, or your traits, give us, I think, a really clear roadmap on how to live openly, honestly, and vulnerably. And I think that that's really what this comes down to, is living your truth, being able to express your truth, being able to show your truth and not feel the shame and not feel that fear of what others would think. Because an open heart, as you said, means I'm receiving and giving honestly. And I think that you use the word courage as one of the traits. That's a key component to all of this, is having courage. Now, speaking of courage, it reminds me of something we were just talking about before we started recording. You said you had a call with your team, and it was regarding how to bring more self-care and to help organizations support their employees, their leaders. And I've heard you reference some of the stats on this. I think there was a Gallup study. It was 44% of people say that work is a contributor to high levels of stress, and 77% of people are feeling disengaged, feeling disconnected, not feeling like their work is meaningful. So while the story of Priya, we're focusing so much on her, and of course she needs to take ownership of what's within her control, I do think there is some responsibility of the organizations. And so can you talk a little bit about that? What do organizations need to focus on in order to ensure that their employees are set up for success, able to handle their stress, and have a healthy work-life balance?
We are right in the middle of a revolution in modern work. right in the middle of a revolution in modern work and the way that the work is done. And it's because the initial model, the initial capitalist model, larger and larger organizations, which survived and did well until the 1970s and 1980s, started to show cracks with worker disappointment, disillusion, burnout, which entered the vocabulary, if you will, in the 1980s and 1990s. And as employers started to notice decline in productivity, decline in innovation, let's say disengagement, especially as the newer generation was demanding more from their workplace, more meaning, it forced a reckoning with how we do business in general. And there are now all of the Fortune 100 companies have some stake in the game of well-being, of the well-being of the workforce, of caring about Priya in a different way, beyond seeing her as a pawn that they could move around to make a few more dollars and maybe run that treadmill faster. Fortunately, this is two conversations that are happening from among the CEOs and CFOs of big organizations. One of them is a moral and an ethical conversation, saying the usual way of doing business where the bottom line is purely defined by the almighty dollar, it doesn't seem to be working very well. We're churning through our employees and nobody wants to work with us now, especially the next generation. They have a choice. They can just get on LinkedIn and find another job like that. Well, 20 years ago, that didn't exist. So the employers didn't have the same impetus, the same pressure or stress to have to do better. And the second shift that I'm seeing is not just in the ethical piece, but it's actually in the business case. So there's a very strong business case for if you want to be a successful leader, you have to think about the holistic well-being, multidimensional wellness of your employee. You can't just think about, I'm going to pay them enough money, I'm going to send them a card at the end of the year, and I'll give them a gold watch after they've worked for us for 50 years, and then a pat on the back and out the door. That doesn't cut it anymore. And so there's both a business case and also a moral and an ethical case. And I think I wanted to just sort of open the conversation with that to say to those people like Priya and people who might be listening and feeling, my job, my employer just doesn't get it. We don't have people like you, like a wellness officer and a well-being this and a whole team as my organization does. We have a whole team whose job it is to listen to the employee well-being, to ask questions over and over and to make changes in policies and day-to-day operations in clinics, in regions that actually make it feel better to work in the place. So I wanted to kind of launch with that fire across the bow and say to anyone who's feeling like, this is never going to get any better, work just really stinks. There are many people, and you're part of this conversation, who are asking this question. Not just how does the individual work skillfully through these, but how can an organization, which is nothing more than a collection of individuals, start to see itself as a living organism and learn about balance and respect for each individual cell instead of just having a top-down mentality. There's a lot we could say about that. Those are my initial thoughts, Jay.
Well, they're great thoughts. And what I think is the reality when it comes to how organizations perceive the need for self-care and, let's say, mental health training or resilience training is we may need to start the conversation in regards to the bottom line, in regards to the business case. And that may be the entryway into it. And honestly, the way I see it, whatever vehicle we need to take to get there, as long as the vehicle is also ethical, right, and moral, I'm willing to get in that car and drive. What I also think is true is to be able to say, okay, we can start with that. But once we kind of break through that first layer, then we can touch more on, as you were describing, the ethical, the moral, the heart of it all. As to the deeper why. It's interesting because it's kind of the opposite approach that you would take with an individual. Usually with an individual, you'd want to touch on the deeper core things first and then justify it a bit logically. I find that when we present this to organizations, we kind of have to work the other way around. It's just the way the systems work. But like I said, whatever gets us there.
Can I show you this? I pulled this off my shelf. So this is a book called Compassionomics. And this is exactly, I think, what started the conversation. It's called The Revolutionary Scientific Evidence That Caring Makes a Difference. And it specifically is about how businesses that have compassion and empathy at the core of their business model are more successful. And it's really more of a business case. That was an interesting book that I read.
Thank you for sharing. I'd love to, we may have to have a whole nother episode about this, by the way, because I could talk about this for forever, because I do think at the core of things, what environments that we are in really make a significant difference. I sometimes reference the analogy of if one walks into a jungle and there are constant threats everywhere they go, the best thing they could do is to leave the jungle. Right? No matter what you do on your own mindset and being able to be mindful and be present, the environment that you're in is too threatening. So there is work to be done on improving the environments. Now, if we were to just wrap things up with the story of Priya, I wanted to ask you if Priya were on this call right now and you had an opportunity to give her one practice, one technique, one tool that would help her to better manage her anxiety while still being able to serve her patients and perform well, what would be the practice or the technique you'd give her?
Normally, I would go with the obvious choice, which would be a basic settling practice, just allowing her to arrive into her body and checking in with the signals that are there and noticing and witnessing her thoughts and feelings as they go by without identifying them. That would be something I would normally do. But with Priya, I would focus on something else once we did the basic practice. What I see with Priya is that she's trapped and she feels stuck. She feels stuck as a mother because she's been going through the same routine. She feels stuck as a doctor because she's always worrying about the same things. She feels stuck in her life because she can't change her job because of financial reasons. I would ask her two simple questions. I would ask her to contemplate and to maybe spend some time journaling or talking with friends. A simple question, which is, who am I? Who am I? And I would just want to hear from her. How would she identify? Would she identify as a doctor? In which case, of course, she's going to be stressed out because she's not meeting the expectations of whatever it means to be a doctor. Is she identifying as a mother? Well, I can tell she's not proud of herself as a mother because of the chaos that's in the house and the way she's reacting to it. So I would want to kind of get to the core of who she believes that she is and explore that a little bit and have her maybe find a Priya that's underneath all of those identities. A Priya that's beautiful, that's kind, that's loving, that went into healthcare in the first place. I would want to get in touch with that Priya, and I'd want to spend some time with her and say, what was it that the young Priya was motivated by, that was fired up by, that made her want to go into this in the first place of all the things? So that would be the first thing. And then once we spent some time on that, I think I would ask Priya the other question, which would be, what do you want? What do you want? Because it's very clear from Priya's story what she doesn't want. She doesn't want the noise in the house and all the fighting over the bathroom. She doesn't want all the stress at work and all the day-to-day decisions, or at least she doesn't want to experience that in the same way. I'd want her to verbalize, how would she like her life to be? And in that question asking, it would then maybe be a revelation for her that she is not destined to be stuck in this version of the life that she is currently in. But unless she starts asking the question, what do I want for my life and who am I? I think she's going to continue in what she's getting already. That's how I would start with her, Jay. How about you?
I have absolutely nothing to add to that. I don't know what else I can add to the suggestions that you gave. If anything, it would just be in considering an additional angle of that practice and being able to encourage her specifically to adopt a practice that would allow for her to tap into that stillness day in and day out in a formal way, as well as ways where she can or tap into that throughout the day as well. Because too often what I find with people is they say, okay, I meditated for 5 minutes in the morning, and then it was, all right, now my mind go. And I just, and I'm just going. But having those moments of bringing it into your day to day would be, if anything, just kind of an added perspective to what you shared so wonderfully.
I love it.
And so, Jonathan, I'm just going to put this up here as one more time for everyone listening. This is the book, everyone. Go get it. Just One Heart, our cardiologist guide to healing, health, and happiness. I believe it's also going to be on audio really soon as well. I want to listen to the audio as well because I'm a audio. I've told you that before. So I'm reading it as well, but I'm gonna be tapping into it once it's on Audible. But Jonathan, I want to thank you for taking the time today, sharing your experience, your insights, your perspectives here on how you would help someone who is feeling really stuck. And I know many people out there are going through things. And I think that the advice that you gave today is incredibly helpful for anyone who's stuck in that kind of place. So I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Oh, this is such an honor. And our connection, Jay, has really helped me be the person that's here today. I really mean that. Just like you said, you can't imagine the old version. The version of me that's here today is partly because of who you are and because of the conversations we've had, just like this one. Thank you.
Of course, my friend. Thank you so much. From this conversation with Jonathan, I want to pull out some insights and some takeaways. So I have 3 insights and 3 actionable takeaways from what you just heard. The insights. Number 1 was the message that Jonathan received from his sister years ago. And that is, be kind to yourself. The second insight was what he was describing about mindfulness meditation and how it helped him. And he said it was a way for him to get out of the loop of repetitive negative thinking and to be able to witness his thoughts with detachment. How powerful is a practice like that? And then number 3 is the insight around how anxiety is not the bad guy. How it could be a strength, it could be a superpower if we challenge and reframe our thinking. In terms of actionable takeaways, things that you can put into action and apply. Number 1, when you're facing disruptive emotions, to ask yourself, is this in the outside world or is this within me? Is this inside of me? The answer often is going to be it's within you. And then the second actionable takeaway is to go into the body first, to notice your bodily sensations and the bodily reaction, address those before you get into the thoughts. And then the third actionable takeaway is to ask those deeper questions of yourself. Who am I? What do I want? And asking yourself these questions and tapping into what is truly motivating you, your deeper why, it will help you to be able to be more effective in having the kind of courage Jonathan was talking about and setting those boundaries, saying no, and being able to manage through high demand work environments. Join us on our next episode of Unstuck, where you'll be meeting Sal, program manager at one of the most well-known tech companies in the world, who feels like he's behind in his career because he keeps falling into the pitfall of comparison. Thank you for listening.